I think we'll start this session since it's 2:30. Oh, we have people in the balcony. Don't throw things from up there, please. I'm Skip Stiles. I'm with Wetlands Watch, and I've been designated as the moderator for this panel on water quality concerns of commercial cannabis production. Oh, no. Oh, sorry. That's next year. This is a solar farm mitigation strategy. And speaking of next year, I'll give an ad here. If anyone here has ideas for sessions for the next Environment Virginia session, think about them while you're wandering around and let the organizers know. There's always an opportunity. I think this year we've had a pretty good agenda. There's lots of blank spots on the agenda. There are lots of rooms that could have been used. So if you've got a good session idea, please put it forward. So today what we're going to be talking about is solar farms, siting, installation, decommissioning, the whole 9 yards of solar farms. And anyone who has been wandering around the Commonwealth has seen these things springing up everywhere. One of the earlier speakers said that we're up to 70,000 acres of solar farms that have gone through DQ permitting. It's probably one of the largest land conversion operations in the state, outside of maybe server farms or some other large area operations. So this is a significant environmental issue. And luckily, we've got three folks who've been involved with this for a while who are going to provide us with some background on it. We're going to go up to 20 minutes each for the speakers, and then we're going to save questions for the end. And we're going to try to save a lot of time for questions, because I know that this issue has been discussed a couple of times, and there's been a lot of chatter at the tables and in the hall. So the first speaker is going to be Richard Street. Richard Street is with Street Development Solutions, followed by Michael Zehner, who's with the Berkley Group. He's the Environmental Programs Director. And then we're going to finish up with Lee Daniels, who's Professor of Plant and Environmental Sciences at Virginia Tech. And again, what we're going to be talking about is utility scale, commercial scale solar farms from cradle to grave. So we will start with Richard Street. Richard?
All right. Well, as mentioned, my name is Richard Street, and I know several of the folks in here have known me for, gosh, Mike, I don't know if we want to say it's almost 40 years now. But I've been doing stormwater management, erosion sediment control for years. I worked for VDOT as a district drainage engineer, worked for several other engineering firms, even worked for Spotsylvania County, helping them out. Even also worked at Stafford County at one point many years ago, and found the opportunity for me to retire all of sorts. But everybody was asking me questions on low impact development and LID, and I've been promoting that for over 30 years. Things started to pop here when I retired. I figured I was going to lay back and be relaxed and have fun. In the last year or so, I've been requested and have inspected some 80 large-scale sites. Now I'm saying large scale. It's large-scale land disturbance, anything over 400 acres, one project where they clear 400 acres or more at one time. Now, yes, the majority of these 80 inspections were solar. And it started to become redundant as to what I was finding, especially when I walked on site. Now, a lot of people don't remember the last few years that I've done the presentation up here about solar. The first thing I said was there's more impervious than what we've been allowing or what we've been recognizing. Even Minnesota and Michigan have already set it up to where all of their forms say it's a minimum of 80% impervious area for every solar farm. I brought those charts back here and nothing was done. We couldn't even try to implement them. They even had spreadsheets that would tell you how much would erode under these panels. So calculation-wise, we can figure it. We can do it. The thing is we have to find the root cause, which is part of what low impact development does, or actually permaculture, because when you look at the practices for permaculture, it's the same as low impact development. So what I started to find out was it's not just solar farms. We have it happening with golf courses. We have it happening with some large scale warehouses where it's so much land disturbance exposed at one time. We didn't calculate it right and we had issues. So I started to go through my inspections and several things started to become very evident. And it broke down into some 3 questions that I would ask. And I'll explain those to you in a few slides. First, I'm going to have you think of a few things. And these were things that came to my mind on my first site when I went out there. And they started to understand if I went out with my regular steel-toed boots, I'm not going off the trail or getting too far away from the fence. But if I went out with my mud boots, they knew I was going to be bird dogging. I'm out in the woods and I'm following the sediment. And they didn't like me when I had my mud boots on. So, of course, there's 2 things. You identify the concern, but then you got to figure out how to fix it. The first thing, traditional design. You cannot design this traditionally with a sediment basin at the bottom and small control measures all the way up the hill. Every solar plan I looked at, this is what they've done. They've designed everything to collect down at the bottom and not be treated up the hill. When we went to DEQ and other folks and said, why can't we use LID, low impact development? It's in the state code and the stormwater regulations to use low impact development. They said, oh, you can use low impact development, go right ahead, but no treatment trains. The number 1 principle of low impact development is treatment trains. If you cannot put in a treatment train, you cannot slow the water down, you cannot stop the sediment from leaving the site. It will not work. There were several sites I walked on and they had what I expected, the filter socks, and mostly filled with mulch. It's the plastic cover, plastic screening that will last for 12 years and then it'll start to die out maybe. But it does not truly decompose. I said, okay, why aren't we using the biodegradable socks? Especially when this is beyond the fence and you're not going to have gates in this security fence. So how are you going to get there to remove it? Because you have no access. And of course, they just stared at me like I was crazy, which, well, some people say I am. Mike doesn't anymore, I don't think. He still might. The sediment transport offsite occurred even when they put in silt fences upstream, or uphill, I should say, from the perimeter controls. So I kept looking and I said, this is, kind of harsh. Then I noticed, of course, it was clay or sandy soils. So the sediment's going to transport no matter what we do. Clay is going to scour. I tried to explain it to them. You need to seed more often. Come to find out, they seeded 3 times before I got there with hydro seeding and it washed off. So other questions started coming up in my mind and I'll lead to those in a minute again. Like I said, the scour and rill erosion was getting so deep that it was a reverse speed bump. I mean, your full tires would go into these rills as you're driving. And I started to say, okay, there's a simple fix to this. You take the biodegradable filter socks, the ones that are either coconut wrapped or they have cotton wrap. And so what are you gonna do with that? I pulled it out, set the larger 12 to 24 inch sock, diameter sock in the rill. And then upstream, I took a smaller 8 to 12 inch one, put it across, creating a T to where it was dammed up, hit the material and flowed right through, did not reel out the clay anymore. And then I said, here, seed it real quick. And we seeded it. And then not more than a week or 2 later, they hydroseeded. They sat there and they said, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. I said, it is going to work. And I said, and one thing your maintenance crews are going to love is you can mow it. Doesn't matter if you tear it apart. You're actually helping it. The water's still going to flow through because that material between the clay has voids and will also absorb. So any water that is slowed down from the basically the check dam we put upstream to go through it would be treated and come out and not scour anymore. And that occurred. And when the hydroseeding was placed, they said, oh, we're going to have an issue with the next storm. The next storm, the hydroseeding stayed in place. It did not move. So I started to teach them how to do this. The destruction and compaction of all erosion control efforts. So started asking questions. What's happened here? What have you done that has messed this up? Well, come to find out, they did the traditional. They put in their perimeter controls. They got everything ready. Everything was calculated perfectly. They got it to a certain grade. They seeded, strawed, thought they were done. Of course, some of the rains were heavy, so the stuff started transporting downstream. But then when they came and it was really starting to get stabilized, yet the grass was maybe 3 to 4 inches tall. It looked good, but it still needed another 3 or 4 days or a little bit more. They came in to drive the piles. Well, they destroyed and ripped out every measure when they had to drive the piles. Didn't think anything of it, seeded, strawed again, and the grass started to take. It was cool, it was great, it was working well. But then they came in to install the connector pipes on top of the supports, and then the solar panels. So 2 more times they had construction activity out there just after we got the grass to take. So when they called me, it was already, to me, too late, because in all honesty, they should have broken up the drainage pattern coming downhill from the top down with something small that would have caught the water and either allowed it to soak in or transport it slowly to get treated through the system, which you can do it quickly with a blade, a simple blade on a plow, and you just do it in a certain way, it's going to stop. The BSc kids at Virginia Tech some 4 years ago designed it and said, here, this will work. They wanted to go a step further by putting in these filter strips and things like that under them. And I said, no, we want to keep it simple. But their final design, to meet the criteria of the class, they had to have an engineering component. So they placed engineering structures. So the potential correction is, don't design with stormwater collecting at the bottom, of course, but also look at the site from the true LID. We need the treatment trains. And use permaculture techniques. Well, permaculture / LID, low impact development techniques. Permaculture actually designs from the bottom up. They sit there and they find their water features and their water weaknesses and say, we need something here, we need something here, we need something here. LID would look from our final product and come down. So that's the traditional low impact development designs. So let's do a mix and make it work better, which in all honesty, where's some of the wasted space on a solar farm under the panels? Why can't we put a stormwater structure or something under that panel? Granted, we'd have to engineer it in such a way to where it would fit, number one. Number two, it's not going to impact the support of the solar panels. And number three, you're not going to mess with any wires that are going on the ground. One thing that was very evident, and it threw me when the contractor for the solar site I was on sat there and he said they contacted everybody they could to see how to aerate and get rid of the compaction. And they were told to till it. Well, I hate to inform you, you cannot till a solar farm. Reason being is by the time it's so compacted, everything's up and ready to run. Plus the tiller blade is usually deep enough to where it could be cutting the underground wires. But then I looked him in the eye and I said, well, why don't you do what the old athletic directors do when they try to aerate their fields for football or for soccer or for baseball? And they looked at me and said, what do you mean? A spiked barrel being pulled by a tractor or the 4x4. And you fill it with water, and it's a 6-inch spike, and you just go back and forth and you're aerating it. There's also a chemical out there. I'm sure Dr. Daniels could probably talk better about it, but there's a chemical that supposedly will help aerate the soils. The big key that I noticed was on these sites, everything was so compacted and so late in the program, you can't aerate it. And to aerate it would be costly and dangerous because you might be working on live wires. So through this, it came down to every site I walked on. And this is scary that it only boiled down to 3 questions. I would ask this one question, very first one. Where's your topsoil stockpile? 9 times out of 10, I'm told, oh, we sold that. Or they moved it to another field for a farmer or something. Let's see, okay. And then my next question was a simple one, I thought. How much of the area, project site area, was forested? And if it's 50% or more, we did something wrong. There's a project, I don't remember how many years ago it was, but I think it was in Greene County. They developed an entire development. I think the reference was the paint factory, that's what they called it. And the entire development, they had a completely wooded site, mulched every tree with stringy mulch, not the chipped mulch, not the ornamental one, the string mulch that will stick together. They left it on site, 4 to 8 inches deep. Never had to put a perimeter control in, ever. Never designed a stormwater management basin. Never put anything in. There was no silt fence, nothing. When they went to do the roads, they cut the road, but they took the mulch, the good mulch, about 2 inches above the ground, took that, stockpiled it to use it again. Where they had 2 inches of mulch left in the topsoil, they went down, grabbing the mulch and the topsoil, cleared that, and laid the stone. Once they laid the stone, it's not running anywhere. It's going into the clay or the next layers of soils. But that stockpile was put in another location because it had the topsoil and 2 inches of mulch. And they did this for every house site, for every stretch of the road, and never had a perimeter control up once. Now, I didn't go back to watch them go through the process completely. The one person who I know was there quite often is Dave Hirschman. I mean, he was there like every day. But I did get to see this occur at another site. It was out in West Virginia, and they did the exact same thing, but I watched them. And when they created the topsoil pile and the regular mulch pile was used as a berm, being your perimeter berm. The water would hit it, and there would be no discharges on the other side. And I sat there and said, wait a minute. And it started dawning on me. One of the big keys of using mulch is it absorbs water. It also, if it's a stringy mulch, it's not going to blow out. Whereas you put in regular mulch, it's going to blow out. So these are the things that I was asking. And the reason I asked these 2 questions, I then asked them one more question, but it related to these 2 items. And it was, what did you do with the trees that were more than 50% of the actual construction site? And they said, oh, we sold those. Got a real good value for them. I said, okay, put those 2 figures together. The topsoil figure you got and the mulch tree, your forestry project, the amount you got for that, put it together. And then now make me a figure, another figure. I want you to calculate a figure that tells me how much did you spend to either buy hydro seeding that was treated with basically fertilizer, which normally would be the topsoil and stuff. And I wanted to know how much mulch you had to add to your fertilizer and how much it cost. So they ran the figures. in the first application of basically the hydroseed with the added fertilizer, the mulch, and everything in there for all the bells and whistles, cost them 3 times more than what they earned from selling the product that they could have saved on site and used. That I'm starting to see in more locations they're doing it. And I said, well, that's cool. I said, can you see that? And then, the look on their face was like, they didn't want to hear that. And I said, well, how many times have you hydroseeded this way with this type of hydroseed? And they said 4. So they lost a heck of a lot of money by not keeping the topsoil and the mulch on property. And now they're having issues, major issues, because their actual grade elevation was not what was where the soils tests were done, because they cut so much off, they're below where the soil tests end. And so they can't even move forward without getting another study done to find out exactly what soils they're dealing with to have grass grow by itself. So when I asked this third question, they were eager. I said, where are your soils reports and the location map? And when I got a hold of the location map, their soils report, spot on for their interceptors and everything they needed for the solar portion, good for some of the roads. And I said, well, where's your information on the basins? How do you know if you need to key in or not? What kind of material do you have in the basin bottom? Is it going to seep? Is it going to infiltrate? And you didn't allot for that. There's several things you need to know. And they said, well, we didn't know we needed that. And I go, I'm sorry, no matter what agency or department you deal with in Virginia, you got to have at least 2 borings to tell you if you need to key it in with clay, or if you need to have fabric or clay added to the basin bottom. And they just looked at me. And I said, okay. And I asked them at that point, are you certified in Virginia as a PE? And the answers was correct, that they are. So the scary part is this was occurring on all of the sites that I visited. And in Virginia, it was at least 18. So we're missing the mark, and we're missing how we need to do this. This all led to a 4th question, and they didn't like it. May I see one plan sheet that shows the grading of a permanent stormwater basin? I said, okay, yeah, sure. Well, from the grading plans, you could spot many things wrong. Like the outlet of the pipe was pointing upstream, facing a creek that has a bend, and you could see how it would develop the wetland and fill the wetland quickly. And the force of the water is heading directly to the pipe. And I said, yeah, we got an issue here. But I said, it's too late to correct it. So you need to revise the outlet and direct it properly and appropriately. The other issue I saw was something that I had only seen once or twice. And I thought it was a fable more than anything else. It was a defined stream, well, not stream, it's a ditch, but it was a natural channel. It wasn't year-round flowing, so it was only when it rained. And you could see it take a curve and go right into the wetland. I said, that's cool. But then there was an anomaly on the downhill side, where you could see in the contours, there was this little bowl of a low area, but we're talking 8 to 10 feet deep. And I said, wait a minute, something's wrong here. And then you could see a little waterfall. And I said, you were on top of a spring. And it's coming from the land that was above the channel, the natural channel. And it was exiting here. And they said, oh, no, there's no way. Went out to the basin. Literally, I walked right to the abutment. I looked down, walked down, stepped right in the middle of this small circle, of fresh, clear water coming out from under a sediment-laden basin. And I mean, the sediment was still floating. And I sat there and I said, there's something wrong here. And they said, okay, we'll plug that up. I go, no, put in a spring box and get a pipe out. Because if you plug it up, you're going to back up the pressure of the water that wants to come out here, and it's going to come up and blow out your dam and the abutment for that basin. And you're going to have a major issue and a major discharge. So when they started to question me and doubt it, I said, all right, let's look at it this way. I'm standing here in the middle of water that's still seeping over my boot. It's all, a small puddle, and then it dissipates down the slope. 30 feet below me is the wetland that has not seen water for a minimum 7 days. The leaves were drying out again, things like that was occurring. And uphill, I was 10 feet below the lowest bottom elevation of the basin. And I said, this is a spring, I guarantee you. And then when we got back up to the top and I pulled out the plan and I stood at one point and I pointed straight at the area across the dam to where that spring was. And you could see it by the contours. That's where it was flowing. So these are some things that they don't look at. And I was dumbfounded when they put the Bloomin' outlet pipe pointed upstream. That threw me. But when I saw the spring, that's not always easy to detect from a regular survey contours, but this showed up. It was plain as day. And with the soils type being sandy and clay and sandy loam, yeah, there could be falling right through one layer and coming out at this one point. And the thing is it still is. And after 7 days of no rain, it was there. Now, I started doing some research and I found something pretty interesting. This was many years ago that I found this document. This document was basically MS4 related. So, I was still with the county, and I was trying to find a better way to capture how much sediment comes off of a construction site. Well, sure enough, out here in Michigan, or Wisconsin, Wisconsin, they came up with this report, and they actually got it approved through EPA, and it takes their soils, and they start telling them, okay, that's my signal again. It tells them exactly what could come off based on your soils group. And when I took that with the probable maximum precipitation that DCR offers for the groundwater and the amount of actual rainfall events, using the rainfall events from this software, and you plug it into any of your new software for your regular stormwater management, you almost double or triple the rainfall amounts, granted, but it's actually more accurate to what we've been receiving in these last several storms. That's the part that threw me. And with the introduction, if we can use the soils one, we could actually project how much sediment could be discharged at any time of the year with every rain event. And these are things we can introduce and actually put our stamp on it and make it Virginia specific. We probably have to work with Dr. Daniels and others at Virginia Tech. But this is primarily what I've been finding. It's scary. The interesting one was doing a video inspection for South Korea. That was interesting. But when we start looking at these things, we need to break up the site into smaller chunks from top to bottom, making certain that by the time they get to the bottom, they will not need a massive stormwater management basin. They may need something smaller. Also, they need to use the areas that they can that are within the solar array to slow the water down and catch it. Oh, this is a EQ plug, so I got to do this. Sorry, Mike. This is something that we found. These are some helpful places or links that will help you with the solar native plant finder. Also soil loss and sediment discharge calculation tool. It's Dane County, Wisconsin. And then always watch for invasives. One thing that a lot of people don't realize, in the green handbook, we have a list of 20 some odd seeds to be used for erosion sediment control. 12 of those 20. This is our list. These are the base 5 that break down into 12 different kind of seed mixes that are invasive. And we've been using them for erosion sediment control for years. And the farmers warned us about it some 40 years ago.
So thank you. Yeah, I want to pull us back up a little bit, or a lot of it. Talk about section 15.22232 of the Code of Virginia, the procedures related to that in the review of solar projects specifically. And I'll talk about at the end, kind of conclude once I've gone over the section, recommendations and best practices for process. And I do apologize, since I'm talking about regulations, I don't have any engaging or illustrative images other than this one, just riveting statutory language. So bear with me. So 2232, as it's commonly referred to, relates to broad impacts, community-wide land use and development policies. The section itself is contained in the section of the Code of Virginia pertaining to the comprehensive plan and localities' use of land use powers under the comprehensive plan, or excuse me, the pertaining to land use powers of local governments, and specifically, again, comprehensive plans. In order to give 15.22232 context, you have to start and look at 2223, which pertains to the comprehensive plan. Of course, that enables and requires the preparation of a local comprehensive plan. And I think most of us are familiar that that's a policy document that addresses long-range policies for the physical development of a community. So in terms of content requirements, and if you're familiar with 2223 of the code, it includes numerous things that you may include, but not limited to these things. And of course, it talks about certain land use and designation of areas for those land uses, and exploring that and exploring the policies related to making decisions about the appropriateness of land uses in the areas of the community that are suitable for those. In developing a comprehensive plan, it's important for a community to balance all of these competing, both compatible and incompatible land uses, while taking into account the unique characteristics and conditions of a community. As the last bullet notes, the comprehensive plan may also designate corridors and routes for the location of electric transmission lines. So with that context, we get into how 2232 is applied with respect to utility scale solar. What 2232 authorizes is for a local planning commission to review the location, character, and extent of a public utility facility, in this case, utility scale solar, to determine whether it's substantially in accord with the comprehensive plan. And that's assuming the plan does not specifically identify the location of a facility. And I'm not really familiar with many that do. In the consideration of this question, the Planning Commission may hold a public hearing. That's the last part of this. So jumping around a little bit and taking subsections out of order, this is part H, where there is a discussion of circumstances where accordance is assumed at the beginning, and that does not require such a degree of review. But generally, for our purposes, we're discussing uses that are not allowed by right, but rather those uses that require a discretionary land use permit, a conditional use permit, or a special exception. For this, the last two sentences are important. The first reiterates the requirement that these types of facilities be reviewed to determine accordance with the comprehensive plan. The second authorizes the 2232 review to be conducted in conjunction with another associated process, a rezoning or a conditional use permit or special exception, some type of discretionary permit. It is important to note here that the 2232 review does not require a public hearing, as we saw on the previous slide. if conducted separately from a rezoning or a permit process, but would be subjected to a public hearing if considered concurrently. So following the review and action by the Planning Commission, they must submit their action and reasons to the local government's governing body. The governing body may overrule the commission's action. Also, there is a right to appeal the commission's action to the governing body. So once we've reviewed all this, what do we determine, Berkley Group, our recommendations and best practices for how communities should review projects under 2232? So first off, and this is probably maybe the most important, ensure that you address solar in your comprehensive plan. Before you're establishing your regulations, go through the planning process. What policies relate to the use? How does the use coexist with other land uses? What impacts will the use have? And so on. These are important questions to ask of in any community. Second, we would recommend that you separate the 2232 review from the review of a discretionary permit. That you conduct the 2232 review first, conclude that process before you initiate the CUP or SUP or special exception review. Third, as a separate review and action, consider whether it is in the best interest of the public, of the community, for the commission to hold a hearing, or simply consider the review as a public meeting agenda item. Think about whether or not the size of the project, the location of the project warrant making sure that the public is aware of the location, the details of that project, and that notice is then required. And fourth and finally, conduct the 2232 review in the Planning Commission's hearing on the discretionary use permit before executing the siting agreement. Allow the public and the Planning Commission's input and perspective to inform any consideration of the siting agreement. So the goals with all of this, as indicated on the slide, are transparency and good governance. We're talking about a significantly large land use in many cases that can have impacts, both potentially positive and potentially negative. And there's no need to rush this. This is something we reiterate with communities, that you should go through the steps, ideally as we would recommend them, but to be as transparent with the public as possible. On occasion, these projects can be surprises to people in the community, but if you've gone through the process of engaging the public through the planning process at the onset, I think ultimately, and there is the goal here of ensuring that we're transitioning to a cleaner energy, but engage the public in that process, make it a community's decision on the location of these, the dynamics of them, the details of them. And I think that's the best recommendations that we could have. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Daniels.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm Lee Daniels. I'm going to do everything I can do to keep us on time here and make sure we've got plenty of time at the end for answering questions, because I'm sure there'll be a few. I'm going to go through a lot of slides relatively quickly. A lot of points are bulleted. If anyone is interested in getting a copy of this in PDF, if you contact me at that email or call me if I'm in the office. And I've worked since 1980, it's hard to admit now, on primarily rehabilitation of mining sites, highway corridors, urbanized areas, a pipeline corridor or two, and other drastic disturbances. So that's what I do. So that's 40 years worth. I've been working on solar for 2 now. So a lot of what I'm saying here is in the context of human disturbance of landscapes and what it takes us in terms of rehabilitating them, and almost everything I've done, you can find a lot of stuff on at that website. So again, we're talking about solar sites and particularly larger utility scale installations, hundreds too often now, with thousands of acres, and some permits actually larger than thousands of acres. So there's going to be what I consider to be 3 or 4 phases of this we need to think about We need to think about, can I predict before I ever go on a site what the likely problems are going to be? Can I identify them and make sure I can mitigate them during the site development process? Can I manage soil quality and site conditions and issues during the active operational phase of the site? And then at the end, can I decommission it and meet whatever promises I've made to the landowners in the county and the citizens about what it's going to look like 25, 30 years from now? Soil disturbance is going to vary widely. It can be less than 10%. It can be 40 to 50 to 60%. In some instances, the entire site undergoes some level of disturbance. Roads, trenches, internal cabling, regrading, all those things. Stormwater basins in certain landscape locations can be a particular concern. In Virginia, West Virginia, most of our subsoils are acid. Most sites with most construction activities, you're lucky if the topsoil is left. You're lucky particularly after 20, 30 years when a site is being demobilized if what you saved, if you saved it, has got any quality left to it. You're going to be dealing often with the subsoils. They're going to be acidic. They're going to be a low phosphorus and low in organic matter. So I'm not going to talk about ENS, but it's obviously critical that you've got to predict it. You've got to be active with it, and it's got to be translated down through the state, through the counties, and onto the on-site inspectors and the contractors and subcontractors. And every site is unique, particularly on contrasting landforms. So some instances, site disturbance is entire. There are often entire sites that for various reasons get graded, regraded, revegetation. On the other hand, I've heard of sites, I haven't seen them yet, that the existing vegetation is left almost entirely intact, and using low pressure equipment, all you're seeing in it is minimal disturbance on the uprights, the pilings. This is an interesting website if anyone goes to it, soilworks.com. They've got pages and pages of pictures like this of sites where this company markets magic. I shouldn't say a magic. Markets soil erosion control and stabilization products. Okay, major issues with disturbed soils in general, and this is worldwide. I don't care where you are, what environment you're in, a mining environment, an urban environment, your front yard, your backyard, a VDOT highway. The major problem that tends to be ubiquitous is compaction. We can deal with acidity. We can deal with lime problems. We can deal with organic matter shortages. Compaction is the major limiting problem affecting runoff and infiltration, affecting permeability, affecting revegetation, and in many instances, complicating DNS. You need to recognize that cuts and fills, where they are, they're fundamentally different. A cut is going to have a very different nature to it going from the top of the cut and down to a fill. A fill by design is going to be highly compacted. It's going to be layered. It's going to have, by design, it's going to have permeability issues because it's designed as a fill. Both cuts and fills in Virginia are commonly acidic and very low P and will require liming, most likely tillage at some point, and fertilizer, organic matter, whatever. Now again, acidity, pH, and fertility are easy to deal with relative to compaction, physical problems, and just surface water hydrology and the runoff. What does compaction do to you? Well, plants can't root through it. That there's no magic answer for compaction. The growing root tip is sensitive. And if it can't find a hole bigger than it is to get into and exploit, it's not going to go anywhere. Once you compact the soil, depending on texture and setting above a given level, you're not going to root through it. I don't care what you do to it up top. You're not going to root through it. If you can't root through it, water's not going to go through it. It's going to perch and pond and run off. And if water can't go into and out of it, then gases like oxygen can't go in, and CO2 and methane and whatever else is brewing down there can't get out. This is a fundamental issue. You then get this widely fluctuating hydrology where it's wet as hell in the winter and ponded and wet and dry as a bone in the summer. We see this. Oh, I've also worked a lot on wetland creation sites. And if there's one issue we see with a lot of wetland creation sites is they're so compacted and so tight, they're wet, 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 too wet, bang, they're dry. And it's a major issue. Finally, there's more voodoo stuff on the market in the revegetation site stabilization market than anything I ever have worked with and around. And I've spent more time trying to answer questions and deal with people who say, this person promised me, for example, liquid lime at 2 gallons an acre is equal to 2 tons per lime incorporated. That's a common claim. There's more stuff out there. Another common claim, gypsum. Gypsum can be thrown on soil and gypsum loosens soil. Bunch of crap. There's no way that gypsum by itself loosens soil. And I'll leave it at that. There's just all kinds of stuff out there that just doesn't work. So we have a compaction. You can see it here. That's platy structure. You see platy structure in a surface like that. You'll see there's very little rooting in that. Yes, there's some happy grass right there. Well, that's because it had been a wet year and that was in a lower slope of position. It had just enough water to it at that time. So those are issues you need to be aware of. Low pH fertility liming need. Something you also need to be aware of this out there and hope you don't run into it is something called acid sulfate soil materials or acid forming materials. They are concentrated locally. We know where they occur in general. We're getting much better at predicting where they occur. If you excavate deep enough, and how deep is deep enough? Well, it could be as close as 2 or 3 feet of the surface. It could be down 50, 60 feet. You go deep enough in certain landscapes, you're going to hit them, like this subdivision in Fredericksburg. Fredericksburg is the only locality in the state that has an acid soil avoidance ordinance, similar to what many counties have on shrink swell soils, because of this subdivision and others like it. I guarantee you within Stafford, Fredericksburg, and Spotsy, there's hundreds of building lots with this problem. So what do you get? You get pH 4 soils that then go to 3, that go to 2. This is sulfuric acid being generated by natural processes. This is not an unknown thing. This is what the mining industry has dealt with globally for hundreds of years. You kill vegetation, you get iron salts. That white stuff is gypsum or alum, and you get local low water quality impacts. Kills sod, kills vegetation. We have no known vegetation that can tolerate pH less than 4 and high salts. That's exactly what we get. Eats concrete alive, eats galvanized alive, eats ductile iron alive. This subdivision alone is looking at several $1 million of infrastructure replacement because of this material. At this one house site, this guy was an interesting person. He was a retired FBI agent. Ran into this problem, just saw the fact that we had been working north of here at a great place called Stafford Airport that had 400 acres of this. Contacted us, we tested his yard. What he needed was 25 to 30 tons per acre, 6 inches deep. 25 to 30 tons per acre, 6 inches deep. That's typical of these materials. Farmers put down 2 tons at a time. 300 pounds of per acre P compost, that was $7,000 materials alone. These 2 pictures were taken the same day. That's the rehab yard. So we can deal with this, but lime, a lot of lime, fertilizer, organic matter, topsoil. That's the picture on the left-hand side. We have at this website, if you go to it, we've got an interactive Google Earth map now that if you hover on this and blow it up, it'll tell you what your risk level is and link you into us in terms of potential remedial strategies. Now, this is just the outcrop of these units. There's lots of places in the state, like say about half of Hanover County, that it might not outcrop at the surface, but if you go down deep enough, 10, 15, 20 feet, you will be in it. Now, don't get me wrong. There's lots of well revegetated solar sites out there. I buy that. You know, frankly, I can get vegetation to grow on marbles if you let me go at it with the right sets of treatments, okay? But there's a whole other set of issues particularly pertinent to solar sites, and that's what I'm here about. So once you're operational, soil compaction is going to be inevitable during a construction. I'm not going to get into runoff and drip lines and concentrated flows and whatever here. I'm not a stormwater modeler. It's not my area. I know just enough about it to be dangerous. Let me put it that way. But I am working as part of a team at Virginia Tech with a good stormwater modeler. His name is David Sample, and some of you know him, and a fellow named John Ignash, who is in our biosystems engineering group, is sort of heading it up. But, you know, there's definitely effect, in my humble opinion, of the panel arrays on stormwater and how it should be modeled and how it's accounted for, and establishing a vegetation, particularly under panels where it's shaded, depending on the height of the panel versus what's in the panel alleys, are often the two very different plant growth environments. What's the answer to a compaction? Well, on a mining site, we just rip the hell out of it. We know how to deal with it. We'll rip one way and rip another way. It doesn't entirely fix the problems, but at least you get better infiltration, less runoff, and better plant growth. And here's an example of a mining site where it's being double ripped right through topsoil. Yeah, you throw some chunks. Now, ripping needs to be done at the right moisture content. You rip it too dry, you can't pull it, you burn fuel, and you throw chunks like this. You rip it too wet, it's like a knife and peanut butter. It goes right through. So significant tillage is the only way to loosen, particularly deep compaction. And you need a ripper or a chisel plow. I love chisel plows. Chisel plows are wonderful tools. Chisel plows can be set as deep as 18 inches or more. You can get them in narrow widths. You could run them through the middles of panel arrays, but I agree, you got to know where the cables are. Because if the cables aren't deep enough and if you hit the cables, you got problems. That's what a chisel plow looks like at that same site. Minimal disturbance at this site. We pulled it down a foot. Long-term site closure challenges. You pull the infrastructure out, you're going to tear everything up again. Don't kid yourself. You know, you've built a site, you've constructed it, you've compacted it. You may or may not have decompacted it. You're going to manage it and mow it the time. You're going to recompact everything that you've run over, and then you're going to tear it up again. All right, so never ever promise a landowner or a board of supervisors that you're going to take something out of prime farmland, particularly put it back like it was. You will not. I defy you to find a spot in Virginia that's gone out of prime farmland, gone through significant cut fill, and ever been put back to 100%. And I've worked on these sites for 40 years. So never make that promise. The worst mistake the mining industry ever makes, and others, is to promise a landowner or a politician or a citizen that I'm going to take this out and it's going to be just like it was. You're not going to do it. Now, hayland and pasture, forestry are very reasonable targets, but they'll all need extensive renovation, extensive remediation, and treatments. Those are my comments. And again, if you contact me, I can share all this, and there's a lot more information on this at that website. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot. We have about a half hour for questions, and anybody who wants to ask them can shout them out, even up in the balcony. Are there any questions for? Yes, there's one right there.
Found a lot of the same issues with soil runoff, not taking care of the property. There was a site you probably didn't into a bunch of, but there was a site in Hanover County, 220 acres by Sun Energy. And when I researched that site to find out about the site in my neighborhood, I was a little bit appalled. Wood pallets that stored the solar panels that came there were still on the site a year later. The place was in existence running. The panels, the pallets were fully up. And I was just appalled that I have a land being treated. Also, that site borders the Monkey River between Berkley and Hanover County. And when I got to walk around the site, the runoff in the Monkey River pretty hard there. And then finally, they had put fence barbed wire across the top so no one could go in. And they planted a tree buffer around it. That's pretty standard. And I want to say I did a count. I actually walked the whole property. And I counted only 36%. And so, you talk to Dr. Daniels about, 30 years later, what's the site going to look like? How they couldn't even take care of the site a year later. That was pretty hard to see. But my question for you all is, when I researched even more, these counties are approving these solar sites on something called conditional use permit. So they don't have to rezone the land. So they're putting these sites on A1 agricultural land. That's what was happening in my neighborhood. The land was a farm for 65 years, for corn, wheat, soy. They wanted to build 45 acres of solar panels on it. And they didn't have to go through rezoning the land. And it's going to be, it wasn't agriculture. So for 30 years, they were going to have a permit to have an industrial site to create energy, but yet none of it was going to be farmed. On the site also was a wetland, designated wetland, that ran into not far, less than half of our down there. So we were lucky, we had a lot of people that in the neighborhood that, complained about it, but still Hanover hasn't changed. So if you guys could kind of talk about that, I don't know if that goes to 2032 or not.
Yeah, it absolutely does. So I think it's fairly common that utility scale is going to be allowed in Ag 1 or AG 1 or comparable district. Some communities also will look to put them in industrial zoned districts as well. Some communities will avoid that because they're looking for income producing uses as well, active uses. And this is part of the process too. I mean, so yes, they don't have to rezone it, but prior to that even becoming an allowed use, they would have gone through, hopefully they would have gone through amending their comprehensive plan to address that use. Then, and they may have done it in conjunction with doing that, they may have amended their zoning. So that's a legislative process. It would have required a public hearing, but because it's at that time, it's not, spatially confined, you're not getting a butters notice. You're going to have to follow the hearing schedule. You're going to have to look in the newspaper for published notice. The conditional use permit is a noticed, usually. It's going to be a noticed hearing required. So, but yeah, you're right. Before the steps that precede the conditional use permit, oftentimes people don't follow that. You know, they're not aware of some of those decisions. And so it is difficult in that way. And it was interesting, I think Dr. Daniels mentioned, you know, was talking about in his presentation relating the scale of development to perhaps the scale of a development of a subdivision. And it's really interesting that, you know, we're talking about a use that's hundreds, thousands of acres, comparable in size to subdivisions, but we don't necessarily approach it the same way from a regulatory or procedural standpoint. You know, we have a lot of applicants that, because it's a conditional use permit, they expect, okay, well, that's one meeting for the planning commission, one meeting for the board of supervisors, and that's it. Where, you know, you can have subdivision hearings and processes take, you know, months, years, because they're of a size, you know, you're dealing with infrastructure that's going to be there for a long time. And it's probably better to look at these projects as they were similar to a subdivision rather than just a, you know, a 1 acre development site. So.
Can I ask a follow on? Because when we've dealt with conditional use permits at a local government level for some of the work that we're doing, you can impose whatever conditions you want on that permit. In one case that we were involved in the city of Chesapeake, there were coal ash that was left behind, and the power generator wanted to have it rezoned, and the city said, no, we're going to put a conditional use permit on it that requires you to come back every 5 years and tell us that the pile is still there or you've done something with it. So they could have put uses on that would have talked about proper siting, retirement of the property. You can, my understanding is you can put almost anything you want in a conditional use permit.
Yeah, there needs to be some nexus to the project, to the scale, to the scope, to the impacts, to the, you know, mitigation has to be related to the nature of the project. It can't be completely arbitrary, but yes, I mean, you could put periodic, you know, for instance, decommissioning plans. We put a periodic check in there in our code regulations and reiterate it usually in the conditional use permit that they have to come back and reevaluate the cost of that decommissioning every 5 years. But there's also the rub of, well, who's tracking that? How are they tracking it? Do they have the resources to track it? You know, prior to my role here, I was a planner and community development administrator, permitting administrator for 20 years almost. And that's obviously the biggest challenge is tracking those legacy permits. And, you know, I've worked 6 different communities and some did it very well and some did not. And I think it's going to be, it depends on if you're reviewing this in a community and if you're in your position, you know, what assurances do you have that that condition that's imposed on this project, that the government has the resources to manage that? That's certainly part of it as well.
But they have no one to go out and check the site. When I showed them pictures of that site, and no, not the 7. Because they're super busy. They're taking on the feet, so I go get it. But I don't know if it's a state level thing or it's, you know, and the soil, stormwater stuff.
More questions? Well, if there are no questions, we can get up early from this and go on about our day then. Thank you to the speakers and thank you all.